For 1,000,000 cycles, the ancients ruled this galaxy. They were beings as old as the stars, shaping planets, seeding life, and extinguishing civilizations that dared to displease them. To them, younger species were just fleeting experiments, noisy children in a cosmic sandbox. Earth was filed away, labeled irrelevant. A divided, violent, emotional little world. Humanity was catalogued, then forgotten. But humanity did the unthinkable. It all started with a signal. A primitive deep space probe, a relic by galactic standards, accidentally pierced a listening veil the ancients had left dormant for millennia. The signal wasn't a greeting, it wasn't a threat, it was music. A raw, unfiltered broadcast of human emotion, woven with intricate mathematical patterns and encoded data. It was proof of intelligence, of creativity, and of a species evolving faster than anyone could have predicted. The ancients noticed, and they were not pleased. Deep in the void, the ancient High Conclave convened in silent judgment. To them, humanity wasn't a threat because of its strength, but because of its terrifying potential. Humans evolved too fast, they adapted too quickly. They learned from their mistakes, and worst of all, they resisted extinction with a stubbornness that bordered on insanity. The ancients' projections showed a future where humanity could rival the gods themselves. That future, they decided, could not be allowed to exist. The verdict was unanimous: extermination. There was no warning, no communication, no chance to surrender. One moment the sky was familiar, the next hell itself tore through the fabric of space. Ancient warforms, constructs older than Earth, materialized across our solar system. Their weapons weren't crude bombs or lasers, they rewrote physics. Entire fleets vanished before the alarms even finished their shrill cry. Cities went dark as our orbital infrastructure crumbled. Our satellites, the eyes and ears of our civilization, burned like a shower of falling stars. Humanity watched as the heavens turned against us. In less than 6 hours, we lost half our orbital defenses. The ancients expected a quick, clean surrender. What they got was defiance. Of course, humanity panicked. Governments fractured. Global markets collapsed. Millions died in that initial devastating strike. The ancients saw this chaos as confirmation of their judgment. They were right. We were fragile. But they misunderstood something fundamental about us. When pushed to the very brink of extinction, humans don't just break. We adapt. We get creative. While the ancients relied on cold, calculated perfection, humanity embraced chaos. Commanders of shattered fleets ignored failing protocols, writing new rules on the fly. Civilian engineers on distant asteroids rewired massive mining lasers, turning tools of industry into weapons of war. In a desperate act of self-preservation, our most advanced AIs were unshackled from their ethical constraints. We stopped fighting like a structured civilization because we were no longer one. We started fighting like cornered survivors. When the ancients moved in for the final blow to sterilize the planet, they encountered something their predictive models had completely missed. Our ships were crude, little more than tin cans against their magnificent warforms. But they were unpredictable. We rammed them. We deliberately overloaded our own reactors, turning our ships into dirty, desperate bombs. We used gravity wells, asteroid fields, and even our own wreckage as weapons. The ancient warforms, designed for clean, distant annihilation, were suddenly dragged into a messy, brutal brawl. And then the impossible happened. One of them fell. A construct that had witnessed the birth of suns was torn apart by a species that had barely learned to leave its own planet. Then another fell. Across the galaxy, other species watched in stunned disbelief. This little, loud species from an irrelevant world was actually hurting the ancients. The ancients felt something they hadn't experienced in eons. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was concern. Our secret weapon wasn't technology. It wasn't superior numbers. It was our psychology. Humans don't fear death in the same way the ancients, with their near immortality, did. What we fear is a meaningless death. And if extinction was inevitable, we were going to make it costly, painfully, agonizingly costly for those who delivered it. The ancient predictive engines failed because they were based on logic, and we were not behaving logically. We were making sacrifices. We were taking insane gambles. We simply refused to lie down and die. This wasn't strategy. It was pure, unadulterated rage. And the galaxy began to watch. The other species, the ones who had lived under the ancients' oppressive shadow for millennia, saw what was happening. No one had ever wounded the gods before. Humanity wasn't winning, not by a long shot. But we weren't dying on schedule, and that single fact was revolutionary. Deep within their timeless, silent networks, the ancients finally updated humanity's classification. They deleted irrelevant, they added anomaly, and then they added threat. But it was too late. It was too late to stop the momentum they had unleashed. Because in our desperate fight for survival, humanity had tasted something far more powerful than victory. We had tasted defiance, and we were just getting started. The ancients expected silence. After the initial shock and awe, after the orbital bombardments and the shattered cities, most species would have simply given up. They would have gone dark, radio silent, technologically stunned, their spirit utterly broken. But Earth did not. Human transmissions didn't just continue, they exploded. A chaotic flood of encrypted data bursts filled the void, bouncing off destroyed satellites, piggybacking on civilian arrays, and transmitted through makeshift relays cobbled together from scrap metal and sheer desperation. To the all-powerful ancients, it looked like meaningless noise, the digital death rattle of a primitive species. But to humanity, it was the sound of survival. This unexpected flood of data forced the ancients to do something they rarely did. They paused. It wasn't an act of mercy. It was one of pure, unadulterated confusion. Human resistance patterns defied all logic. There was no single, unified command structure to decapitate. There was no predictable military doctrine to counter. Some regions of Earth collapsed in an instant, just as their models predicted. But others fought back with a terrifying, savage efficiency, using tools that should have been hopelessly inferior. The ancients' predictive engines, powerful AI capable of modeling the rise and fall of civilizations over millennia, began to glitch. For the first time ever, they started returning contradictory results, spitting out paradoxes and impossible scenarios. You see, for the first time in its violent history, humanity wasn't fighting to win. Not yet. They were fighting to learn. Every piece of debris from a destroyed ancient warform was a priceless treasure. Wreckage was dragged into secret underground facilities, bunkers buried deep beneath the earth. Scientists worked around the clock, fueled by stimulants and a primal need to understand their new gods. In an act of ultimate desperation, humanity unleashed its own forbidden tools. Fully autonomous AI systems were granted emergency powers, a line they had sworn never to cross. And what they discovered changed the course of the war. Ancient technology wasn't magic. It was just physics, optimized to a degree of perfection humans could barely comprehend. It was flawless. It was efficient. And because of that, it was predictable. Its perfection was its greatest weakness. The first major breakthrough didn't come from a success. It came from a catastrophic failure. An ancient weapon core, being analyzed in a deep Earth lab, suddenly destabilized and detonated. The explosion vaporized the entire research team, but the data streams captured in the final milliseconds before the blast revealed the enemy's secret. Ancient systems required absolute stability to function. Their perfection demanded a predictable, orderly environment. Human systems, on the other hand, were born from chaos. They thrived in it. Ancient weapons, shields, and engines all suffered catastrophic failures when exposed to chaotic, unpredictable variables. Random electromagnetic pulses, sudden gravity fluctuations, unorthodox energy surges. Humans didn't fight clean, they fought dirty. With this revelation, human engineers stopped trying to copy ancient technology. They started doing something far more dangerous. They started sabotaging it from the inside out. The new generation of human weapons wasn't designed to punch through an ancient warform's hull. They were designed to break its fundamental assumptions. Human ships began to intentionally overload their own reactors, creating massive, unpredictable energy spikes. Weapons were fired deliberately off-cycle, creating rhythmic noise that confused targeting sensors. Battle formations became illogical, swarming tactics that defied all military doctrine. And it worked. Ancient targeting systems, faced with this onslaught of pure chaos, began to hesitate, just for a fraction of a second. But a fraction of a second was all humanity needed. When the ancients finally resumed their main assault, they expected a broken and compliant race. Instead, they walked straight into a trap. The battleground was Earth's shattered moon. Once a symbol of hope and exploration, it was now a fractured, unstable graveyard, surrounded by dense, chaotic debris fields. The ancient fleet advanced with supreme confidence, their perfect formations cutting through the void. And then, space itself turned hostile. Humanity unleashed its new weapons. They were crude gravity projectors, but they were wildly unpredictable. They sent entire clouds of moon debris spinning at impossible angles, creating a kinetic minefield that changed from second to second. The ancients' shields compensated, their automated systems adjusting flawlessly, until they couldn't. The sheer randomness of the impacts overloaded their calculations. One ancient warform lost stabilization and began to tumble. Another, trying to evade a newly formed debris cloud, collided with a wingman. A third detonated spectacularly when its own weapon systems misfired in the chaotic energy environment. For the first time, the galaxy watched as humanity destroyed an entire ancient assault group, not by matching their technology, but by turning the environment itself into a weapon. They used improvisation, they used chaos, they used sacrifice. The ancients had never encountered a species willing to lose just for the chance to learn. In the silent, sterile data logs of the ancients, this moment would later be labeled the Divergence. It marked the first time an ancient commander's report contained a new, terrifying word: uncertainty. Not defeat, not retreat. Uncertainty. Humanity was no longer just a problem to be solved. They were an anomaly. They were no longer reacting. They were experimenting. And that is what truly terrified the ancients. The ancients were perfect, yes, but they were also static, immortal and unchanging. Humans were the opposite. They evolved in real time on the battlefield. Every single battle made them smarter. Every loss was a lesson that refined their tactics. Every death was data. Human commanders began to openly speak of casualties as an expected and necessary cost, not because they were cruel, but because the threat of extinction had burned away their fear of death. A species with absolutely nothing left to lose is the most dangerous force in the entire universe. Whispers started to spread across the galaxy. The other client races, subjugated for eons by the ancients, began to take notice. If the primitives on Earth could wound the gods, if they could survive the initial purge, what else was possible? Some species started sending encrypted data packets to Earth, star charts, ancient fleet movements. Others covertly shipped resources. And some did the most rebellious thing of all. They simply stopped obeying the ancients' decrees. A rebellion was spreading, not through force of arms, but through the infectious power of hope. Faced with this growing, unpredictable anomaly, the ancients made a critical error. Their flawless logic dictated a simple solution: escalation. They authorized the use of precursor-level suppression weapons, horrifying devices capable of sterilizing entire solar systems, wiping them clean of all life. Their logic was perfect. Their timing was not. Humanity intercepted the activation signal. They didn't have the technology to stop it, not yet. But by analyzing the signal, they understood something that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The weapons of the gods had an off switch. The ancients could be killed. Human leadership faced its final defining choice. They could hide. They could try to survive quietly in the dark corners of the galaxy, hoping the ancients would eventually forget them. Or they could evolve into something else entirely. They chose evolution. In that moment, humanity wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. They were fighting for every species the ancients had silenced, every civilization erased from history. The war was no longer about survival. It was about liberation. Humanity, the broken, chaotic, unpredictable species, was about to teach the gods how to fear. For 1,000,000 cycles, the ancients had never known fear. They had watched stars die, civilizations vanish, and entire species fade into cosmic dust without a second thought. They were the architects of the galaxy, the masters of existence, and their rule was absolute, until they met humanity. Their first strike should have been the end, a swift, surgical erasure of a minor, insignificant species. But humanity survived. And then humanity fought back. Soon, they weren't just fighting back. They were evolving, adapting at a rate the ancients couldn't comprehend. Across the galaxy, a name once whispered in obscurity began to echo with a strange new power: Earth. What made humanity so different? It wasn't bigger guns or superior fleets. It was something the ancients, with all their logic and processing power, could not compute: chaos. Humans had weaponized unpredictability. They didn't need a perfect plan. They thrived on improvisation, adaptation, and a willingness to sacrifice that bordered on insanity. Ruined cities, once symbols of defeat, were transformed by human engineers into sprawling, deadly weapon platforms. AI swarms, designed on the fly, learned and optimized themselves mid-battle, turning ancient tactics into traps. Human starship captains defied established doctrine, acting on instinct, exploiting every infinitesimal flaw in the ancients' understanding of physics. The ancients could calculate every probability down to the last decimal, but humans didn't operate on probability. They operated on creativity, and that creativity terrified the immortal beings. For the first time, anomalies began to appear in the ancients' command network reports. An unexpected resistance pattern, deviation from predicted loss ratios, psychological unpredictability detected in human commanders. For the first time in 1,000,000 years, an ancient general paused, not to recalculate tactics, but to rethink their entire grand strategy. Never before had any species forced the ancients to hesitate. The turning point came near the Orion sector. The plan was simple: lure a small fleet of ancient warforms into a dense asteroid cluster. The ancients foresaw an easy victory, a simple cleanup operation. They had not accounted for human ingenuity. As their fleet entered the cluster, gravity wells shifted without warning, reconfigured on the fly by hidden human projectors. Asteroid mines, thought to be primitive, triggered devastating chain reactions in patterns that defied all logic. In a move that left the ancient observers stunned, human pilots deliberately rammed their own damaged ships into the warforms, causing cascading system failures. By the time the chaos subsided, the results were unthinkable. 3 ancient warforms, titans of destruction that had pacified entire star systems, were reduced to drifting wreckage. 2 more were critically damaged, forced into retreat. 1 ancient general, monitoring the battle from a distant command nexus, uttered a word that had no equivalent in their language, a concept they had never needed to articulate: fear. This was the humans' true advantage. their psychological edge. The ancients relied on logic, precision, and immutable rules. Humans ignored the rules, they exploited mistakes, they learned from failure faster than the ancients could possibly adapt. That single realization sent a shockwave through the immortal consciousness. A mortal species, fragile and short-lived, could now hurt them. This wasn't just a victory in numbers, it was a victory in principle, and once a principle is broken, the cracks begin to spread. Other oppressed species, long cowering in the shadows of ancient dominion, saw what had happened. They began to act. Smuggled fleets, appearing out of nowhere, shared vital intelligence with Earth's forces. Rogue scientists from subjugated worlds secretly transmitted data on ancient technological weaknesses. Rebellious planets began sending critical supplies, risking annihilation to support the human cause. Humanity had become more than just a species fighting for its own survival. They had become a symbol of defiance for the entire galaxy. This was no longer just a war, it was the beginning of a galactic rebellion. In their growing frustration, the ancients made a critical error. They decided to double down on fear, a weapon they had perfected over eons. They activated precursor-level suppression grids over human colonies, broadcasting signals designed to shatter morale and induce terror. Orbital bombardments intensified, turning skies from blue to blazing orange. The plan should have crushed humanity's will to fight. Instead, it did the opposite. Humans are creatures of pattern recognition. They studied the suppression grids, learned their frequencies, and used the ancients' own weapon systems against them. They analyzed the bombardment patterns and turned them into ambushes. For the first time in galactic history, mortals forced immortals to retreat, to rethink, and to fear. Out of the ashes of this conflict, a new human doctrine was forged. Fail fast, adjust faster, turn the environment itself into a weapon. Sacrifice what you must to save what truly matters. And most importantly, attack the mind, not just the body. Ancient commanders began documenting this new way of war, classifying it as a behavioral virus, a mimetic contagion that could spread and corrupt their own perfect logic. The ancients finally understood one terrifying truth: humanity would not stop. The news of human resilience spread like wildfire. On star systems previously loyal to the ancients, whispers of doubt turned into open questions of obedience. Neutral civilizations, long content to stay out of galactic politics, began to reconsider their alliances. The idea that the ancients were not invincible, once a fantasy, was now becoming a tangible possibility. Humanity's struggle was not just about their own survival anymore. It was proof that the status quo could be broken, that change was possible. As humanity grew stronger and their alliances wider, the ancients realized something far worse than the possibility of defeat. They were learning what it felt like to be hunted. They were learning fear, fear of unpredictability, fear of loss, fear of a species willing to burn down the entire galaxy just for a chance to survive. For the first time in millennia, the architects of the galaxy felt vulnerable. And for beings who have only ever known absolute power, vulnerability is the most dangerous poison of all. The galaxy was approaching a tipping point, and no one, not even the ancients themselves, could predict what would happen when it was finally reached. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the cosmos, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories from the edge of the universe.